Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So for this video, I'm finally getting to my both December wrap-up and January wrap-up. I realized that I forgot to do my December wrap-up, and then, it's already been like a week or so in February, so I should probably just get to both of these. And I have a lot of books to talk about. December, I read a decent amount of books, and then in January, I read a lot of books. So I have a lot of books to talk about, so, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So before I forget, I have a few books that I read in December and January that I don't, that I've either like gotten rid of or that I don't own physically, that I don't want to forget to talk about. So I've got a list here. So let's go ahead and talk about those first. In December, I read The Good Daughter by Karen Slaughter. Bring your daughter to the slaughter. Iron Maiden song. This is one of the books I read for me and Josephina from Feeney Reads. We did a book swap together, and this was, I believe, one of the books I was supposed to read. The Good Daughter, it was pretty good. I think I gave it 3.5 stars. This book had moments of brilliance, like moments of like just real family drama and tension, but just the way that the book was structured and also just the book's length really irked me. Like, I really wish it would have just, I don't know. It's hard to explain. Like moments of this book were like 5 stars, but then moments of this book, the way it was written was more like 2 stars. So it's kind of a mixed bag for me. I could definitely tell that she's an excellent writer, but this book was just, it ended up being just pretty good for me. But yeah, good daughter, good time, 3.5 stars. And another book that I sadly DNF'd in December was Vengeful, which is the sequel to Vicious, which was like one of the best books that I read in 2021. Absolutely loved that book, 5 stars. And I was pretty excited for the sequel, although I kept hearing a lot of people say that the sequel was inferior. And it definitely was. I got halfway through the book and I just did not give a crap. And I'm personally a person who loves time jumps and like non-linear storytelling, but good God, it just bounced around everywhere. Like just 15 years ago, 2 years ago, 2 weeks ago, 10 years ago. Like, Jesus Christ. All right, now let's talk about some books that I read or tried to read in January. The first one is a DNF, and that would be The Wolf of Oroñaro. And this was again recommended to me by Josephina. I know she loves this book and the trilogy in general and this author, but I just really didn't. It just didn't meet my expectations. I got through like 200 pages of the book, and it's not what I wanted it to be. It kind of went in a direction that I didn't really care for, so I just DNF'd it. So not a terrible book, but it just did not meet my expectations. And then we have Good Neighbors by Sarah Langan, I think is the name. And this was a Patreon pick for January. And while I did somewhat enjoy this book, and it did have moments of brilliance, for the most part, even though like I did enjoy some crazy stuff that happened in this book, I really couldn't care less about any of the characters. And I'm more, I need a good balance of characters and plot. And while this book did have some crazy ass moments, I really just didn't care about any of the characters. And it's not that I don't really care if I like any of them. I can find a character compelling even if they're despicable. I just thought these characters were just kind of caricatures of real life people, and none of them were very compelling. So the stuff that was happening while it was crazy just didn't really affect me that much. So Good Neighbors was more of a 3-star book for me. And then we've got The Clown Brigade by Stephen Graham Jones, which I listened to this on Scribd. And this is just like a short story. I think it was like an hour long. It was pretty good. I gave it 4 stars. Very funny. Definitely Stephen Graham Jones, like quintessential dark comedy. Like once you kind of figure out what's going on, It's pretty hilarious. We also have The Maid, and the name of the author is escaping me, but very popular book. Me and Stacy actually read this together, and more specifically, she read this book to me via Discord video chat, and we both kind of had mixed opinions on it. I was enjoying the book overall until the end because of the character and just the character is clearly on the spectrum, and so the way that she's like describing the story, she tends to not pick up on social cues. So it was a very interesting way to tell a mystery where kind of the whole time you realize what's going on, but she doesn't. I thought that was brilliant. But just the ending just really left a sour taste in my mouth on how everything kind of wrapped up. It got very sappy, and it was fairly disappointing. Speaking of disappointing, I also read Locklands by Robert Jackson Bennett. Now, this was very disappointing in that I loved Foundry Side and I loved Shortfall. I gave both of those books 4.5 stars, and I was eagerly awaiting to read Locklands. However, it starts with an 8-year time jump, and I'm not the biggest fan of time jumps. Like even book 2 had like a 2-year time jump, and I kind of just roll my eyes at that. But when I saw an 8-year time jump, I was like, good God. And even Stacy, who, read this book a few weeks after I did, she's like, oh, time jumps don't really matter to me. But then she kind of understood why it's infuriating, because we're just put in a different situation. We have no context, and it just didn't work for me. Well, I mean, I didn't hate it. I gave it 3.5 stars, so not a terrible book. It had some great moments, but overall, it was a weak conclusion to the trilogy. All right, with that stuff out of the way, I can actually talk about the physical books that I have read in December and January. I'm going to try not to make this video too long, so I'll try to speed it up here. The next 2 books are both Agatha Christie books, and I read these because I was I did an Agatha Christie read-along, and I was on Kevy's team from Say Kevy. She is the captain of Tommy and Tuppence, and so I read a couple Tommy and Tuppence stuff. Posturing of Fate is the conclusion to the Tommy and Tuppence series. You know what? Tommy and Tuppence, I do love the characters, but oftentimes their stories are not that engaging or engrossing for me. I loved The Secret Adversary. That's book 1. That's like a 5-star book for me. But then the rest of the series, they're just more like 3.5 star books, and this is no different. And then I reread Partners in Crime, which is their short story collection. And I don't typically love Agatha Christie short stories. In fact, I usually don't like them at all. But this one's actually pretty good. There's some gems in this one. We also wrapped up Nightmares and Dreamscapes for the Stephen King short story book club. And this is definitely my least favorite. I have a book review for this, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. It is my least favorite Stephen King collection. It's got a few gems in here, but overall, meh. I also finished my reread of A Feast for Crows, book 4, and A Song of Ice and Fire, one of my all-time favorite series, excuse me. And yeah, not much to say. I love this book. And I also read With Blood Upon the Sand by Bradley P. Bulio, and this is book 2 in the Song of Shattered Sand series. I'm getting very excited because we're getting close to finishing the series. I will, however, say that book 2 is probably my least favorite book in the series at the moment, because book 1 and book 3 have both been 5 stars. This one has been demoted down to 4.5 stars because I didn't really love the flashback chapters in this one as much, so it gets demoted a tiny bit, but still, Song of Shattered Sands, one of my all-time favorite fantasy series. I also read Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio, book 1 in the Sun Eater series. Now, I only gave this book 3.5 stars. I loved the first chunk of this book. The middle chunk, not so much, but then the ending was excellent. And then I read book 2, which I'll talk about in a minute here. So book 1 was pretty good, but a lot of people tell me that it gets better and better as it goes. So obviously I will be continuing. I also read Voice of War by Zach Argyle, which is book 1 in the Threadlight trilogy. And this one was pretty good. I enjoyed 2 of the characters' perspectives that we get in here. One of them, not so much. It didn't really do anything for me, but I am interested in continuing and finishing the trilogy, probably in April. But yeah, I'm pretty interested. I also had my annual reread of Drums, Girls, and Dangerous Pie, and me and Stacy were actually reading this together. I was reading it to her. We actually didn't get to finish it like in November when I usually finished it. We finished it in December, and obviously I've talked a lot about this book. She really liked this book too, which I'm thrilled. Speaking of Stacy, I read one of her all-time favorite books that she read last year, which is The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. Now, she, recommended this book because it's got such a bonkers twist that really duped her, and she was like, wait a minute. So I was like, okay, I'll read it. And yeah, I feel exactly the same way. I loved this book, gave it 5 stars. Probably my second favorite book of 2022, other than Project Hail Mary. Absolutely loved this book. Definitely my favorite Riley Sager book, like by far. All right, so now we're moving on to January. And the first book I'll talk about here is The Darkness That Comes Before by R. Scott Baker. This is the first book in the Prince of Nothing trilogy. And I gave this book 3 stars. Pretty decent fantasy debut. It took me a long time to get used to the writing style and kind of just how not clear it is. Like, it's definitely flowery writing, and a lot of the times I was just trying to picture the scene and just like what is happening. But what I did enjoy this book was kind of the dark brutality of the world, and I really enjoyed the characters and their dialogue specifically. So there is a lot to look forward to in book 2, which I hear a lot of people say is a big improvement. So I will read book 2 eventually. I also read Veil of Spears, book 3 in the Song of Shattered Sand series. This might actually be my new favorite in the series, although I still love book 1. Veil of Spears is just like nonstop action, whereas book 1 is kind of like getting the world building and the characters, which I love. I typically love book 1s in series, but book 3 was just brilliant, and everyone that's doing the read along has really enjoyed book 3. And then we have Howling Dark by Christopher Rocchio, and this is book 2 in Sun Eater that I read in January. Definitely a improvement on book 1, although I only gave it 4 stars. I think my biggest gripe with this book is that it is slow, and while I love Hadrian Marlowe as the main character, the main protagonist, I don't really care about any of the secondary characters. And while I do enjoy his journey and kind of the world building of like what is going on, it does drag a bit, and the other characters don't really do it for me. I am really hoping that the third book is an improvement on the second book, so we'll see. I have no idea when I'll actually get to that book. I also read What I Talk About When I Talk About Running by Haruki Murakami, and this is actually kind of his nonfiction halfway memoir, basically about him talking about his journey and his experiences with running, which I think is funny because most of my life I hated running, and because I was definitely overweight and I was not really very active. But when I started losing weight back in 2020, I actually found running to be very enjoyable. So it was kind of interesting to read about his experiences. And I think I gave this 4, maybe 4.5 stars. It's a pretty fun read. I also read Spontaneous Human Combustion by Richard Thomas. And this is a what? This is a horror short story collection. I think it's self-pub too. Pretty good collection. I gave it 3 stars. I think there was mainly like 5 standout short stories out of the 15 that were in here that were just excellent. The rest of them were either just good or kind of forgettable, or just they went way over my head. But overall, it was decent, so I gave it 3 stars. The 5 stories in there here though are just excellent. I also had my reread of My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. Loved it just like I loved it the first time. Jade, the main character, is one of the best Stephen Graham Jones creations ever, just because I can really relate to her love of horror movies, and I love all of the horror movie references in here, and also just the story is great. And I reread this because book 2, Don't Fear the Reaper, is coming out in February. It's actually coming out today, the day that I'm filming, which is February 7th, by the way, if you didn't know. But yeah, this book is excellent, and definitely looking forward to book 2. Another book I read is The Woman Outside My Door by Rachel Ryan, and I believe this is a debut by like an Irish mystery thriller writer. Overall, it was pretty good, 4 stars. This book didn't necessarily blow me away, but what it did do well, it did very well, and if that makes any sense. Like, again, nothing blew me away, but like what it was going for, it did a really good job. Like, it wasn't super original by any means, but it did a good job with all of the tropes that it uses. And overall, it's very enjoyable, very exciting ending too. So yeah, pretty. If you want like a short thriller to kind of burn through, that's enjoyable. Yeah, Woman Outside My Door, 4 stars. And then I have 2 novellas that are in the Song of Shattered Sands series. The first one that I read was The Doors at Dusk and Dawn. And pretty much everybody that's read this novella in our little group read along has absolutely loved this book. 4.5, 5 stars. I gave this 5 stars. This is probably one of the best fantasy novellas that I've ever read. Super gripping, great characters, just overall very fast paced. Just everything really just clicks in this novella, and it's awesome. And then we have the next one, In the Village Where Bright Wine Flows. This one's very short. It's like 70 pages. I wish we would have gotten a bit more of the story, because the story itself was good. I gave it 4 stars. We follow someone named Darth Zada, and if you've read the series, you know who that is. It's very fun, kind of like a murder mystery kind of deal. I just wished we would have had a bit more detail with everything, but I did enjoy it. I gave it 4 stars. And then I have 2 more books to talk about that were both 5 stars. One of them is like potentially my favorite book of the year. It's awesome. But the first one I'll talk about here is I Hate Fairyland by Scotty Young. Now, this book is a bit different because I don't normally read like graphic novels or comic books, but this was recommended to me from Kevy from the channel Say Kevy, and she really thought this was hilarious, and I thought the premise was pretty funny. Basically, it's about like a young girl who gets transported to fairyland, and her goal, her mission is to like find a key, and if she finds the key, she can go home. Well, it's like 27 years later, she still hasn't found the damn key, and it's just bonkers and hilarious, and this little girl just causes a lot of mayhem, and it's extremely violent and gory, and it's amazing. And the ending to this book just made me laugh hysterically. I laughed throughout this book. It was just a lot of fun, and hopefully I can get my hands on book 2. I just dropped my potential book of the year. Whoops. But yeah, the last book I'll have to talk about is Tender is the Flesh by Augustina Batsrika. This book was absolutely amazing. I listened to this book on audio while I was like raking leaves in the backyard just for a day, and it's a very, very short book. It's like a 6-hour audio, I think, and it was just amazing. And if you don't know, basically the premise of this is that people can't really eat animal meat because it's like tainted, so they have to figure out a way to like eat meat. And so basically the human consumption of human flesh, cannibalism, is legalized, and it's manufactured in a factory. And just the directions this book goes in, like the way, just the author's thought process on like what the world would actually look like if this actually happened, was amazing. And the characters were great, and just the ending of this book, it perplexed me enough to like think about it for like hours, just trying to wrap my head around everything. And once I kind of figured out what she was going for, it just blew me away. So 5 stars, one of the best horror novels I've ever read. Potentially my favorite book of the year, but it's only February, so we'll just have to wait and see. All right, so if I'm not forgetting anything, that is my December and January wrap up. All of the books that I read in December and January. What did you guys think of the books that I read over the past few months? Have you guys read any of these books? Did you love them? Did you hate them? Did you think they were kind of meh? Do you agree or disagree with me on any of these books? What were your favorite and least favorite books that you read in December and January? I want to know. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the YouTube channel and the Book Astronomer Discord. I also have my Patreon page if you want to support me there. I have my Amazon wishlist if you'd like to buy me some books. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a fantastic day.